Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the jobs that made medieval life smell like a combination of rotting fish, human waste, and pure desperation. You're about to discover careers so revolting that modern sewage workers would quit on the spot. Yet someone had to do them, and they did every single day for centuries. Picture this. You're standing at the edge of a medieval cesspit at midnight, holding a wooden shovel, knowing you're about to descend into a pit of human excrement that's been fermenting for months. The smell hits you like a physical wall, but you climb down anyway because this disgusting job pays better than most honest work. You probably won't survive this career without permanent lung damage, but hey, at least you'll have coins in your pocket. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing this community span the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are a gong farmer, and your workday begins when everyone else's ends. The term gong comes from the Anglo-Saxon word for privy, and you're the person brave enough, or desperate enough, to clean them out. In medieval England, this job was so essential yet so revolting that it was heavily regulated by law. You could only work between 9 at night and 5 in the morning, ensuring that decent folk wouldn't have to witness your disgusting profession or smell the results of your labor. Your tools are primitive: wooden shovels, leather buckets, and a strong stomach. You wade through human waste that's been accumulating for months, sometimes years, in private homes and public latrines. The consistency ranges from liquid sewage to solid chunks that have to be broken apart with your bare hands. The smell is so overwhelming that many gong farmers develop a condition where they permanently lose their sense of smell, which, honestly, might be a blessing in this line of work. The pay, however, makes this nightmare worthwhile. A skilled gong farmer could earn more in a single night than a craftsman made in a week. Wealthy households paid premium rates for discretion and thorough cleaning, while public contracts provided steady income. You're essentially running a small business built on society's most basic biological need, the disposal of human waste. But here's where it gets interesting. Gong farmers weren't just cleaning up mess. You were also treasure hunters. People dropped valuable items into privies, coins, jewelry, eating utensils, and everything you found was yours to keep. Some gong farmers became surprisingly wealthy, not just from their cleaning fees, but from the lost valuables they recovered from the depths of medieval toilets. The health risks were enormous. You're constantly exposed to diseases like cholera, dysentery, and typhoid. Many gong farmers died young from respiratory infections caused by inhaling toxic gases that accumulated in enclosed spaces. Methane poisoning was common, and more than a few workers simply collapsed and drowned in the very waste they were trying to remove. Historians still argue whether gong farming was considered a respectable trade or a social stigma. Some records suggest that successful gong farmers were accepted members of their communities, while others indicate they were shunned and forced to live on the outskirts of towns. What's certain is that medieval society couldn't function without them. Your biggest challenge isn't just the smell or the health risks, it's the sheer physical difficulty of the work. Medieval cesspits were often 10 to 15 feet deep, with narrow openings that barely allowed a person to squeeze through. You're working in cramped, dark spaces, where one wrong step could mean falling into a pit of sewage with no easy way to climb out. The job required genuine athletic ability and problem-solving skills. The waste you collected wasn't just thrown away, either. Human excrement was valuable fertilizer, and you sold it to farmers who used it to enrich their fields. This created an entire economy around human waste. You were essentially the middleman in a recycling system that turned the most disgusting byproduct of human civilization into agricultural gold. Some gong farmers specialized in particular types of cleaning. Palace gong farmers dealt with the waste of royalty and nobility, requiring discretion and higher skill levels. Monastery gong farmers cleaned religious institutions, while urban specialists handled the massive public latrines that served entire neighborhoods. Each specialization had its own techniques, tools, and pay scales. The most successful gong farmers employed assistants and operated like small businesses. They invested in better equipment, developed efficient cleaning methods, and built relationships with wealthy clients who paid premium rates for reliable service. Some even passed their roots down to their children, creating multi-generational gong farming dynasties. You've just finished your shift as a gong farmer, but now you're trading one disgusting job for another. Welcome to the world of fulling, where your feet become tools for transforming raw wool into luxury fabric, and your main ingredient is stale human urine. As a fuller in ancient Rome, you start each morning by collecting urine from public urinals stationed throughout the city. Romans actually paid taxes on urine collection because it was so valuable to the textile industry. You're not just grabbing any random pee. You need urine that's been aging for several days, allowing the ammonia to concentrate and become more effective at breaking down the natural oils in wool fibers. Your workshop smells like a combination of wet sheep and a public bathroom that hasn't been cleaned in weeks. The process begins when you receive raw wool cloth that's been woven but still contains lanolin, dirt, and other impurities that make it rough and unwearable. Your job is to transform this scratchy material into the soft, clean fabric that wealthy Romans demand for their togas and tunics. The fulling process is surprisingly athletic. You strip down to minimal clothing because you're about to get soaked in urine-soaked wool and step into large stone vats filled with cloth and fermented urine. Then you begin what can only be described as the world's most disgusting dance. You stomp, jump, and knead the fabric with your feet for hours, working the ammonia through every fiber while the urine splashes around your legs. The chemical reaction happening under your feet is actually quite sophisticated. The ammonia in aged urine breaks down the lanolin and other oils, while the mechanical action of your stomping helps felt the fibers together, creating a stronger, softer fabric. You're essentially performing chemistry with your feet, though the Romans didn't understand the science behind why urine worked so well. They just knew it did. But here's the really gross part. You're not working alone. Multiple fullers often work in the same vat, stomping around each other in a choreographed routine designed to maximize efficiency. Imagine a group dance where everyone's feet are covered in sheep wool and human waste, and you're all trying not to slip and fall into the mixture. The coordination required is actually impressive if you can get past the smell. The urine collection process created its own economy. Professional urine collectors, called urinarii, made regular rounds to public facilities and private homes, paying small fees for access to chamber pots. The best urine came from people who drank a lot of wine, as it produced higher ammonia concentrations. Some wealthy Romans even sold their personal urine to fullers for premium prices. Your workday doesn't end with the stomping. After hours of foot fulling, you have to rinse the fabric in clean water, then treat it with fuller's earth, a type of clay that absorbs remaining oils and impurities. This creates a different kind of mess, as you're now working with muddy clay that gets under your fingernails and cakes onto your skin. The combination of urine, wool fibers, and clay creates a paste that's nearly impossible to wash off completely. The social status of fullers was complicated. On one hand, you were providing an essential service that enabled the Roman fashion industry. Wealthy citizens depended on your work to maintain their appearance and social standing. On the other hand, you literally worked with pee all day, which didn't exactly make you popular at dinner parties. Most fullers lived in specific neighborhoods, often downwind from the rest of the city. Historians still argue whether fullers were considered skilled craftsmen or just laborers willing to work with disgusting materials. Some evidence suggests that successful fullers could become quite wealthy, owning multiple workshops and employing dozens of workers. Other records indicate they were looked down upon and excluded from certain social activities because of their association with urine and waste. The health risks were significant but different from those faced by gong farmers. Constant exposure to ammonia could cause respiratory problems and skin irritation. Many fullers developed chronic coughs and rashes on their feet and legs. The clay used in the process sometimes contained harmful minerals that could cause long-term health problems if inhaled regularly. But fullers also developed some unexpected benefits from their work. The ammonia exposure actually helped prevent certain skin infections, and many fullers had remarkably soft feet due to the constant chemical exfoliation. Some even claimed that the urine treatments helped prevent foot fungus and other common problems. The most skilled fullers could identify the quality of urine by smell alone, determining which batches would produce the best results for different types of fabric. They developed techniques for mixing urine from different sources to achieve specific effects, turning what seems like a disgusting process into a sophisticated craft requiring genuine expertise and experience. Remember that medieval cesspit we started with? Well, fullers were actually some of the best customers for gong farmers, as they needed steady supplies of aged human waste for their textile work. The two professions were connected in ways that created an entire economy built around. You've left the urine-soaked world of fulling behind, but your next career move takes you even deeper into human waste, literally. Welcome to Victorian London sewers, where you're about to become a tasher, one of the most dangerous and disgusting professions in history. As a tasher, you wake up before dawn and prepare for a workday that takes place entirely underground in London's massive sewer system. Your equipment is minimal: a canvas bag for collecting treasures, a long pole for probing dangerous areas, and a dark lantern that provides just enough light to see the rats scurrying away from your footsteps. You're about to spend the next 8 hours wading through a mixture of human waste, industrial chemicals, and rotting garbage in tunnels that could collapse at any moment. The entrance to your workplace is through manholes, storm drains, or secret passages that connect to the Thames. You lower yourself into a world that exists parallel to Victorian London, a network of brick tunnels filled with sewage that flows beneath the feet of respectable citizens who have no idea you exist. The smell hits you immediately, a combination of human waste, dead animals, industrial runoff, and gases that can literally knock you unconscious. Your job is treasure hunting in the most disgusting environment imaginable. Wealthy Victorians regularly dropped valuable items into toilets, storm drains, and gutters: coins, jewelry, silverware, even gold teeth. Everything that falls into London's drainage system eventually flows through these tunnels, and you're here to catch it before it reaches the Thames. The irony is that you're making a living from other people's carelessness, while risking your life in conditions that would horrify them. The sewer system itself is a maze of tunnels at different levels, with main arteries large enough to walk upright and smaller branches where you have to crawl on your hands and knees through flowing sewage. The Victorian engineers who built this system created a marvel of urban planning, but they never intended for people to actually work inside it. You're essentially trespassing in a giant toilet that serves 2 million people. Your biggest enemies aren't just the obvious ones like disease and toxic gases. The tunnels are home to massive rats that have grown fat on the constant supply of organic waste. These aren't ordinary house rats. They're sewer rats the size of cats, and they're not afraid of humans. Some toshers carry clubs specifically for fighting off aggressive rats that might attack if cornered. The sound of hundreds of rats splashing through sewage in the darkness is something that haunts many toshers' dreams. But the real money comes from understanding the flow patterns of London's waste system. You learn which tunnels carry runoff from wealthy neighborhoods, where the best treasures are likely to accumulate, and how to time your expeditions with the tides that affect the sewer's flow rate. Experienced toshers develop an almost supernatural ability to spot valuable items in the murky water, distinguishing between worthless debris and genuine treasure. The legal status of toshers was complicated. Technically, you were trespassing on city property and stealing items that belonged to the municipal government. But the authorities largely ignored tosher activities because nobody else wanted to venture into the sewers, and your work actually helped prevent blockages that could cause serious public health problems. It was an unofficial arrangement where everyone pretended not to notice what you were doing. Some toshers worked alone, but many operated in small groups for safety. The buddy system was essential because the tunnels contained numerous hazards that could kill a solitary worker. Sudden floods from heavy rainfall could trap you in rising sewage. Toxic gases could cause you to lose consciousness, and tunnel collapses were always a possibility. Having a partner meant someone could pull you out if you got into trouble. The most successful toshers developed relationships with mudlarks, people who searched for treasures in the Thames mud at low tide. Together, you created an informal network that tracked valuable items from the moment they entered the sewer system, until they either reached the river or were recovered underground. This cooperation increased everyone's chances of finding valuable items while reducing the risks of working alone. Historians still argue whether toshers were criminals or entrepreneurs. Some records suggest they were viewed as necessary scavengers who performed a valuable service, while others indicate they were considered dangerous criminals who threatened public health. What's certain is that they knew London's underground geography better than anyone, including the engineers who built the system. Your daily routine involves more than just treasure hunting. You also encounter the darker side of Victorian society, evidence of crimes, abandoned babies, and the desperate attempts of people to dispose of incriminating evidence. Toshers often discovered things that revealed the hidden secrets of respectable London society, making them unofficial keepers of the city's darkest secrets. The health risks were enormous. Constant exposure to sewage meant regular infections, respiratory problems from toxic gases, and skin conditions from contact with industrial chemicals. Many toshers died young from diseases that were directly related to their work environment. Yet the potential rewards kept people coming back, because a single valuable find could provide income for months. You've crawled out of London's sewers, but your next job makes toshing look like a pleasant stroll through a garden. Welcome to 14th century Europe, where you're about to become a plague body collector during the Black Death, arguably the most horrifying job in human history. Your workday begins at dawn when the church bells ring, signaling another day of death in a city where 1/3 of the population is already dead or dying. You pull on your leather gloves, grab your wooden cart, and begin making rounds through neighborhoods where entire families have been wiped out overnight. The smell of rotting flesh permeates everything, and you've learned to breathe through your mouth to avoid the worst of it, though the taste of death still coats your tongue. The first house on your route contains a family of 5 who died 3 days ago. The door is marked with a red cross and the words, "Lord, have mercy on us," the official sign that plague has visited this home. You push open the door and immediately encounter a scene that would break most people's minds. Bodies in various stages of decomposition, some still in their beds, others collapsed on the floor where they fell while trying to care for their dying relatives. Your job is to load these corpses onto your cart and transport them to mass burial sites outside the city walls. But this isn't just a matter of picking up bodies. You're handling human remains that are actively decomposing, often bursting with fluids and gases that have built up since death. The bodies are heavy, awkward to move, and frequently fall apart when you try to lift them. You've learned to work quickly and efficiently, but there's no way to make this job dignified or pleasant. The plague victims you collect aren't just anonymous corpses. They're people who were alive and healthy just days ago. You recognize faces from the marketplace, children you've seen playing in the streets, merchants who sold you bread. The psychological toll of constantly handling the bodies of people you knew is something that haunts every plague collector. Many of your colleagues have gone mad from the constant exposure to death and suffering. Your cart becomes a mobile morgue as you make your rounds. By midday, you're pulling a load of 15 to 20 bodies through streets where the living watch from their windows, praying they won't be on tomorrow's collection route. The wooden wheels of your cart leave tracks in the mud mixed with blood and other bodily fluids that leak from the decomposing corpses. The sound of your cart approaching has become the soundtrack of death for entire neighborhoods. The mass burial sites where you deliver your cargo are scenes from hell itself. Enormous pits have been dug outside the city walls, and you're dumping hundreds of bodies daily into these communal graves. There's no time for individual burials, religious ceremonies, or even basic dignity. You simply back your cart up to the edge of the pit and dump the bodies in, then return to collect more. The pits are so full that you're literally throwing bodies on top of other bodies. But here's what makes your job even more horrifying. You're not just collecting the dead. Sometimes you arrive at a house where people are still alive but clearly dying, and families beg you to take their suffering relatives away. You have to make split-second decisions about who's actually dead and who might still recover, knowing that a mistake could mean burying someone alive or leaving a corpse to rot in a family home. The pay for this nightmare job is surprisingly good when you can find someone alive to pay you. Many plague collectors became wealthy during the outbreak because they were among the few people willing to handle the dead, and desperate families paid premium rates for body removal. However, collecting payment often meant searching through the belongings of dead families, which technically made you a grave robber as well as a body collector. Your biggest occupational hazard isn't just the obvious risk of catching the plague yourself. The constant lifting and moving of heavy, decomposing bodies takes a severe physical toll. Many plague collectors develop back problems, hernias, and joint issues from the repetitive strain of loading corpses. The psychological damage is even worse. Most plague collectors who survive the outbreak never fully recover from the trauma of handling thousands of dead bodies. The social status of plague collectors was complicated. On one hand, you were performing an essential public service that helped prevent the spread of disease. On the other hand, you were associated with death and contamination, making you a figure of fear and superstition. Many people believed that plague collectors were spreading the disease rather than helping to control it. Historians still argue whether plague collectors were heroes or opportunists. Some records suggest they were brave individuals who risked their lives to serve their communities, while others indicate they were criminals who took advantage of the chaos to rob the dead and extort the living. The truth probably includes both types of people, as desperate times often bring out both the best and worst in human nature. Your work equipment evolved as the plague progressed. Early collectors used simple wooden carts and their bare hands, but survivors learned to use hooks and poles to avoid direct contact with bodies. Some developed primitive protective clothing, though nothing that would actually prevent infection. The most experienced collectors learned to identify which bodies were most likely to be contagious and developed techniques for handling them more safely. Remember those goals. You've survived the plague collection routes, but your next career takes you from handling the dead to deliberately attracting blood-sucking parasites. Welcome to the world of leech gathering, where you're about to use your own body as bait for medical leeches that will drain your blood while you stand waist-deep in stagnant swamp water. Your workday begins before sunrise as you wade into marshes and ponds where medicinal leeches thrive. You're wearing minimal clothing, just enough to maintain basic decency, because your exposed skin is the primary tool of your trade. The water is murky, filled with rotting vegetation and teeming with insects, but you're not here for the pleasant scenery. You're here to attract leeches that will attach themselves to your legs, arms, and any other exposed flesh they can find. The technique is deceptively simple. You stand perfectly still in leech-infested water and wait for them to find you. Leeches are attracted to movement, body heat, and the carbon dioxide you exhale, so you're essentially a walking advertisement for a free meal. Within minutes, you feel the first one attached to your calf, a sensation that's been described as a gentle pinch, followed by a warm, tingling feeling as the leech begins to feed on your blood. But you're not just standing around letting leeches drain your blood for fun. These parasites are valuable medical supplies that doctors use for bloodletting treatments, which medieval and early modern physicians believed could cure everything from headaches to heart disease. A single high-quality leech could sell for a substantial amount of money, making your blood loss a profitable investment, assuming you don't pass out from blood loss before you can collect your harvest. The leeches you're collecting aren't just any random bloodsuckers. You're specifically hunting for Hirudo medicinales, the European medicinal leech, which produces natural anticoagulants that prevent blood from clotting during feeding. These chemicals make the leeches particularly effective for medical treatments, but they also mean that your wounds will continue bleeding long after the leech detaches. You'll spend the rest of your day with dozens of small wounds that won't stop bleeding. Your biggest challenge is timing the collection process. Leeches need to feed for about 20 to 30 minutes to become fully engorged with blood, at which point they naturally detach from your skin. If you try to remove them too early, they won't be as valuable to medical practitioners. If you wait too long, you risk losing too much blood and becoming weak or dizzy. Experienced leech gatherers develop an almost supernatural sense of timing, knowing exactly when each leech has fed enough to be worth collecting. The physical toll of leech gathering is more severe than most people realize. A single leech can consume up to 5 times its body weight in blood, and you might have 20 or 30 leeches attached to your body simultaneously. The blood loss is significant enough that many leech gatherers develop chronic anemia, fatigue, and other health problems related to regular blood loss. Some experienced gatherers can lose up to a pint of blood during a single collection session, but the health risks go beyond just blood loss. The stagnant water where leeches live is a breeding ground for bacteria, parasites, and other pathogens. Every leech bite creates an open wound that's exposed to contaminated water, leading to frequent infections. Many leech gatherers develop chronic skin conditions, and some die from blood poisoning caused by infected leech bites. The irony is that you're collecting medical supplies while destroying your own health. The most skilled leech gatherers develop techniques for maximizing their harvest while minimizing their blood loss. Some use decoy animals, horses or cattle, to attract leeches, then transfer the feeding parasites to their own bodies for the final collection phase. Others learn to identify the most productive leech habitats and time their visits to coincide with peak feeding activity. The best gatherers can collect hundreds of leeches in a single day. Your relationship with the leeches becomes surprisingly intimate. You learn to recognize different species by their feeding behavior, identify which ones are healthy enough to sell, and even develop preferences for certain types of leeches based on their attachment style. Some leeches are aggressive and attach quickly, while others are more selective about their feeding sites. Experienced gatherers can predict which leeches will be the most valuable based on their appearance and behavior. The economic side of leech gathering created its own specialized market. Hospitals, physicians, and apothecaries all needed steady supplies of fresh leeches, and they were willing to pay premium prices for high-quality specimens. Some leech gatherers developed exclusive relationships with medical practitioners, guaranteeing regular income in exchange for consistent supply. The most successful gatherers employed assistants and operated like small businesses. Historians still argue whether leech gathering was considered a legitimate medical profession or just a desperate way to make money. Some records suggest that leech gatherers were respected members of the medical community, while others indicate they were viewed as expendable laborers who were willing to sacrifice their health for money. The social status probably varied depending on the region and the individual gatherer's reputation. The seasonal nature of leech gathering meant that you had to make enough money during the active months to survive the winter when leeches were dormant. Many gatherers supplemented their income with other jobs, often choosing work that complemented their leech gathering skills. Some became general medical suppliers, while others moved into related fields like herb gathering or pharmaceutical preparation. Remember those fullers who worked with urine? Well, leech gatherers sometimes sold their services to the same medical practitioners who bought processed textiles for bandages and medical supplies. The medieval economy was surprisingly interconnected, with disgusting jobs often supporting each other in unexpected ways. You've drained enough blood to supply a small hospital, but your next career combines two equally unpleasant jobs that somehow made perfect sense in the pre-industrial world. You're about to become a knocker-upper and night soil man, which means you'll spend your nights emptying chamber pots and your early mornings waking up entire neighborhoods by throwing pebbles at their windows. Your workday actually begins at sunset, when respectable people are settling down for the evening. You grab your hand cart, a collection of wooden buckets, and a long-handled ladle that's seen more human waste than a modern sewage treatment plant. Your first job is making rounds through the city, collecting the contents of chamber pots from homes and businesses that pay for your services. This isn't just a matter of emptying containers. You're handling the concentrated waste products of entire families who have been using these pots all day. The night soil collection process requires surprising skill and diplomacy. You have to enter people's homes, often through back doors or servants' entrances, and remove chamber pots without waking the sleeping residents. Some houses have multiple pots in different rooms, and you need to navigate through dark hallways while carrying containers full of liquid waste. The smell is overwhelming, but you've learned to work quickly and quietly, like a reverse burglar who steals waste instead of valuables. Your handcart becomes increasingly heavy as the night progresses. A full chamber pot can weigh 15 to 20 pounds, and you're collecting dozens of them during each shift. The liquid sloshes around as you push your cart through cobblestone streets, occasionally spilling onto your clothes and shoes. By the end of your collection route, you're covered in a mixture of urine, feces, and whatever else people have deposited in their chamber pots during the day. But here's where the job gets interesting. Night soil was actually valuable fertilizer. You're not just disposing of waste, you're collecting agricultural gold that farmers will pay good money to spread on their fields. Human waste contains nitrogen, phosphorus, and other nutrients that help crops grow, making your disgusting cargo an essential part of the food production system. You're literally turning human waste into human food, though most people prefer not to think about that connection. The disposal process takes you outside the city limits to designated areas where you dump your collected waste into large pits or spread it directly onto agricultural fields. The smell at these disposal sites is indescribable. Imagine the concentrated odor of hundreds of chamber pots mixed with decomposing organic matter and industrial runoff. You work quickly to empty your cart and get back to the city before the smell permanently attaches to your clothing. Your second job begins around 4 in the morning, when you transform from a waste collector into a human alarm clock. As a knocker-upper, you're responsible for waking up workers who need to be at their jobs before sunrise. Your tools are simple: a long stick for reaching upper-story windows, a pocket full of pebbles for gentle wake-up calls, and a mental map of every client's schedule and preferred wake-up method. The technique requires surprising precision. You need to wake up your clients without disturbing their neighbors, which means knowing exactly which window belongs to which person and how much noise it takes to wake them up. Some people are light sleepers who respond to gentle tapping, while others require more aggressive pebble throwing. You develop personal relationships with your clients, learning their sleep patterns and adjusting your methods accordingly. The timing is critical because industrial workers, bakers, and other early shift employees depend on you to get them to work on time. Being late could cost them their jobs, which means your reliability directly affects their ability to feed their families. You carry a pocket watch and maintain a strict schedule, making rounds through different neighborhoods at precisely timed intervals. The responsibility is enormous. You're literally holding people's livelihoods in your hands. Your route planning becomes an art form as you optimize your path to wake up dozens of clients in the most efficient order possible. You learn shortcuts through alleys and side streets, memorize the locations of aggressive dogs that might interfere with your work, and develop contingency plans for bad weather that might affect your ability to reach upper-story windows. The mental mapping required is surprisingly sophisticated. The social dynamics of being a knocker-upper are complex. You're providing an essential service that people absolutely need, but you're also interrupting their sleep and privacy. Some clients treat you with respect and gratitude, while others view you as a necessary annoyance. You learn to read people's moods and adjust your approach accordingly, developing customer service skills that would be valuable in any era. The combination of night soil collection and knocker-upper services made economic sense because both jobs required working during hours when most people were asleep. You could collect waste during the night and wake people up in the early morning, maximizing your income while minimizing conflicts with other types of work. The scheduling also meant that you could clean up and change clothes between your two jobs, though the smell of night soil was notoriously difficult to wash off completely. Historians still argue whether knocker-uppers were considered skilled professionals or just people willing to work unusual hours. Some records suggest they were respected members of their communities who provided essential services, while others indicate they were viewed as intrusive figures who violated people's privacy. The social status probably varied depending on the individual's reliability and customer service skills. The health risks of combining these two jobs were significant. Constant exposure to human waste led to frequent infections and respiratory problems, while the irregular sleep schedule required by knocker-upper work caused chronic fatigue and other health issues. Many people who worked both jobs developed permanent health problems that affected them for the rest of their lives. Remember those plague collectors who dealt with mass death? Well, knocker-uppers often served as early warning systems for disease outbreaks, as they were among the first to notice when entire households failed to respond to wake-up calls. You finished your rounds as a knocker-upper, but your next career takes you into the dark, cramped spaces beneath the city where death lurks in every shadow. Welcome to the world of rat catching, where you'll spend your days crawling through plague-infested cellars with nothing but a pack of terriers and your bare hands to protect you from swarms of disease-carrying rodents. Your workday begins when you receive a call from a desperate homeowner, shopkeeper, or warehouse manager who's discovered that rats have taken over their property. You arrive with your team of specially trained rat-catching dogs, usually Jack Russell Terriers or similar breeds that were bred specifically for hunting small, aggressive prey in confined spaces. These dogs are your partners, your protection, and often your only companions in a job that most people consider too dangerous and disgusting to attempt. The first step is assessment, which means crawling into basements, sewers, and storage areas to determine the extent of the rat infestation. You're looking for signs of rat activity, droppings, gnaw marks, nesting materials, and the distinctive musky odor that indicates a large rat population. The spaces you're investigating are often pitch black, filled with debris, and contaminated with rat urine and feces that can carry deadly diseases like bubonic plague, typhus, and leptospirosis. Your equipment is surprisingly minimal for such a dangerous job. You carry a dark lantern for light, leather gloves to protect your hands from rat bites, a collection of wooden clubs and metal traps, and various containers for collecting dead rats. The most important tool, however, is your knowledge of rat behavior, understanding how they move, where they nest, and how they react when cornered. This expertise can mean the difference between a successful hunt and a dangerous encounter with a swarm of panicked rodents. The hunting process is part strategy, part athleticism, and part controlled chaos. You release your dogs into the infested area and follow them as they track down rat colonies. The dogs are trained to kill rats quickly and efficiently, but they can't handle large infestations alone. You're there to block escape routes, dispatch rats that the dogs miss, and protect your canine partners from being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The sound of barking dogs, squealing rats, and scurrying feet in confined spaces creates a cacophony that's both terrifying and exhilarating. But here's what makes rat catching particularly dangerous. Rats don't just run away when threatened. Large rats, especially those that have been feeding well in urban environments, can grow to the size of small cats and will fight viciously when cornered. They have sharp teeth, powerful jaws, and the intelligence to coordinate attacks when their colony is threatened. You've been bitten more times than you can count, and each bite carries the risk of serious infection or disease transmission. The medieval and early modern periods saw rat populations explode in urban areas, creating perfect conditions for disease outbreaks. Your job isn't just pest control. You're a public health worker fighting to prevent plague epidemics that could kill thousands of people. The irony is that you're constantly exposing yourself to the very diseases you're trying to prevent, making rat catching one of the most dangerous jobs in terms of occupational disease risk. Your dogs require constant training and care because they're essential to your survival. A good rat-catching dog can clear a cellar in hours that would take you days to handle alone. You feed them well, treat their injuries, and develop personal relationships with each animal. Many rat catchers become more attached to their dogs than to other humans, partly because the dogs are the only creatures willing to share the dangers of this profession. The payment structure for rat catching was usually based on results rather than time. Clients paid you based on the number of dead rats you could produce, which created an incentive system that encouraged thorough work. Some rat catchers developed techniques for preserving rat tails as proof of their kills, while others brought entire rat carcasses to demonstrate their effectiveness. The most successful rat catchers could earn substantial money during major infestations. Your biggest challenge isn't just the physical danger of handling aggressive rodents. Rat infestations often occur in the worst possible locations: flooded basements, collapsed buildings, abandoned warehouses filled with rotting merchandise. You're working in environments that are structurally unsound, poorly ventilated, and contaminated with various toxic substances. Many rat catchers die from accidents, building collapses, or exposure to industrial chemicals rather than from rat-borne diseases. The social status of rat catchers was complicated by the essential nature of their work and the disgusting conditions they worked in. People desperately needed your services, but didn't want to associate with someone who spent their days covered in rat blood and feces. Many rat catchers lived on the margins of society, respected for their skills but avoided in social situations. The job attracted people who were already outcasts or who had few other employment options. Some rat catchers specialized in particular types of infestations. Ship rat catchers worked on vessels that had picked up rodent populations during long voyages. Warehouse specialists dealt with commercial infestations that threatened stored goods. Residential rat catchers handled household infestations that posed health risks to families. Each specialization required different techniques and equipment, but all involved the same basic risks and challenges. The seasonal nature of rat catching meant that your income fluctuated dramatically based on weather, economic conditions, and disease outbreaks. Rat populations exploded during warm months and after good harvests, creating peak demand for your services. Winter months were often slow, forcing many rat catchers to find supplementary income or rely on savings from busy periods. Historians still argue whether rat catchers were skilled professionals or desperate individuals willing to take extreme risks for money. Some records suggest they were respected members of their communities who provided essential services, while others indicate they were viewed as dangerous outcasts who might spread the very diseases they were supposed to prevent. The truth probably varied depending on the individual's reputation and the community's experience with rat-borne diseases. Remember those toshers who worked in London sewers? Well, rat catchers often worked in the same underground spaces, and the two professions sometimes overlapped. Sewer systems were prime rat habitat, and tosher work was frequently interrupted by encounters with aggressive rat colonies that required professional intervention. You've survived the rat-infested underworld, but your next career takes you into an environment so toxic that it literally strips the skin from your hands while you work. Welcome to the medieval tannery, where you'll spend your days transforming animal hides into leather using a cocktail of dog feces, human urine, and rotting flesh that creates one of the most nauseating work environments in human history. Your apprenticeship begins in the soaking pits, where fresh animal hides arrive covered in blood, fat, and chunks of meat that need to be removed before the tanning process can begin. You're handed a curved knife called a fleshing blade and told to scrape away every bit of organic material from the hide's surface. The smell is overwhelming. Imagine the worst butcher shop you've ever encountered, multiplied by 10 and left to rot in the sun for several days. The first step in the tanning process involves soaking the hides in lime water to loosen the hair and outer skin layers. You're working with quicklime, a caustic substance that burns your skin on contact and creates toxic fumes that make your eyes water and your throat burn. The lime pits are filled with a mixture of water, lime, and decomposing organic matter that creates a soup so corrosive it can dissolve fingernails if you're not careful. Your hands are constantly raw and bleeding from lime burns. But the real horror begins when you move to the baiting process, where the hides are treated with dog feces to soften the leather and remove remaining lime residue. You're literally working with buckets of dog excrement that's been aged and fermented to achieve the right consistency and chemical composition. The enzymes in dog feces break down proteins in the hide, but they also create a smell so intense that many apprentices vomit during their first week on the job. Your daily routine involves handling hides that are soaked in various stages of this disgusting process. You lift them out of lime pits, scrape them clean, move them to feces baths, and then transfer them to other treatment solutions. Each hide weighs 30 to 50 pounds when wet, and you're handling dozens of them every day. The physical strain is enormous, but the chemical exposure is even worse. Your skin is constantly irritated, your respiratory system is under attack, and your clothes are permanently stained with substances that smell like death. The tanning solutions themselves are a medieval chemist's nightmare. In addition to lime and dog feces, you're working with oak bark extracts, alum, and various other chemicals that were discovered through trial and error over centuries. The tannic acid from oak bark is what actually transforms the hide into leather, but the process requires precise timing and temperature control that you learn through years of experience and frequent mistakes. Your workspace is a collection of stone vats, wooden frames, and drying areas that are permanently saturated with the odors of decomposition and chemical processing. The floors are slippery with spilled solutions and organic matter, making falls a constant hazard. The air is thick with toxic fumes that cause headaches, dizziness, and respiratory problems. Many tannery workers develop chronic coughs and lung problems that persist for the rest of their lives. But here's what makes the job even more disgusting. You're not just working with dog feces. Different types of animal waste were used for different leather qualities. Pigeon droppings were preferred for fine leather goods, while chicken manure was used for everyday items. You become an expert in the properties of various animal excrement, learning to identify the best sources and aging techniques for different types of leather production. The social implications of tannery work were severe. The smell was so intense that tanneries were required to operate outside city limits, downwind from residential areas. Tannery workers were often prohibited from entering certain establishments, attending social events, or even shopping in some markets because their odor was considered offensive to respectable citizens. You're essentially exiled from normal society because of your profession. The health risks extended beyond just chemical exposure and respiratory problems. The constant handling of animal hides and organic waste led to frequent infections, skin diseases, and parasitic infestations. Many tannery workers developed chronic skin conditions that never fully healed, and some died from infections that entered through cuts and abrasions on their hands and arms. The combination of toxic chemicals and biological contaminants created a perfect storm of occupational health hazards. Your apprenticeship involves learning not just the technical aspects of leather production, but also the business side of managing toxic waste and chemical supplies. You need to know where to source the best dog feces, how to age it properly, and how to dispose of the enormous quantities of toxic waste that the tanning process generates. The logistics of running a tannery were as complex as the chemistry involved. The economic importance of leather made tannery work essential despite its disgusting nature. Leather was used for shoes, clothing, armor, bookbindings, and countless other products that medieval society couldn't function without. Your disgusting work was directly connected to the production of luxury goods, military equipment, and everyday necessities that people took for granted. Some tanneries specialized in particular types of leather production. Fine leather for bookbinding required different techniques than heavy leather for armor or shoes. The most skilled tanners could produce leather goods that were works of art, but the process always involved the same basic ingredients: animal hides, toxic chemicals, and various types of aged excrement. Historians still argue whether tannery workers were skilled craftsmen or just laborers willing to work in disgusting conditions. Some records suggest that master tanners were respected members of their communities who possessed valuable technical knowledge, while others indicate that tannery work was considered a last resort for people who couldn't find other employment. The social status probably varied depending on the individual's skill level and the quality of leather they produced. The seasonal nature of tannery work meant that your income and working conditions fluctuated based on the availability of fresh hides and favorable weather for drying leather. Winter months were often slow because hides took longer to dry, while summer brought increased production, but also intensified the smell and health hazards of working with decomposing organic matter. Remember those fullers who worked with urine to clean. You've escaped the toxic fumes of the tannery, but your next career takes you into the shadowy world of grave robbing, where you'll spend your nights digging up freshly buried corpses to sell to medical schools that desperately need bodies for anatomical study. Welcome to the profession of resurrection man, where you're technically a criminal but practically an essential supplier for the advancement of medical science. Your workday begins after midnight when the graveyards are empty and the authorities are asleep. You arrive at the cemetery with your team of fellow body snatchers, carrying shovels, ropes, and a wooden cart that will soon be loaded with stolen corpses. The work requires careful planning because you're not just randomly digging up graves. You're targeting specific burials based on information about the deceased's age, health, and time of death. Fresh corpses are worth more money, but they're also more likely to be missed by grieving families. The digging process is surprisingly technical and requires genuine skill to avoid detection. You don't excavate the entire grave. That would take too long and leave obvious evidence of your activities. Instead, you dig a tunnel from the head of the grave down to the coffin, then break through the wooden lid to extract the body. This technique, called tunneling, allows you to remove a corpse while leaving the grave looking relatively undisturbed from the surface. Your biggest challenge is working quickly and quietly while handling decomposing human remains in complete darkness. You're using hand tools to break through wooden coffins, then pulling out bodies that may be in various stages of decay. The smell is overwhelming, especially during warm weather when decomposition accelerates. You've learned to work with minimal light to avoid detection, relying on touch and experience to locate and extract bodies efficiently. The bodies you're stealing aren't just anonymous corpses. They're recently deceased members of the community who were buried by grieving families just days or weeks earlier. You're violating graves of people who died from various causes: disease, accidents, old age, and sometimes violence. Each body tells a story, and you become an unwilling expert in the effects of different diseases and injuries on human remains. Your customers are medical schools and private physicians who need cadavers for anatomical study and surgical training. The legal supply of bodies for medical education was severely limited, creating a black market that you're helping to supply. Doctors and medical students desperately needed hands-on experience with human anatomy, but social and religious taboos made it nearly impossible to obtain bodies through legal channels. The transportation of stolen bodies requires careful planning and specialized equipment. You're moving human remains through city streets while avoiding detection by authorities, family members, and curious citizens. The bodies are wrapped in canvas or placed in specially designed containers that disguise their contents. Some resurrection men used fake delivery wagons or posed as legitimate tradesmen to avoid suspicion during transport. Your relationship with the medical community is complicated by the illegal nature of your work. Doctors and medical schools need your services, but can't publicly acknowledge your existence. Payment is usually made through intermediaries, and the entire transaction is conducted with the understanding that everyone involved is technically breaking the law. The hypocrisy is obvious. Respectable physicians who condemn grave robbing in public are secretly your best customers. The preservation of stolen bodies becomes a technical challenge because decomposition continues after death, reducing the value of your merchandise. You learn techniques for slowing decay, including the use of ice, salt, and various chemical preservatives. Some resurrection men developed sophisticated storage facilities that could keep bodies fresh for extended periods, allowing them to build inventory during peak digging seasons. The social dynamics of grave robbing create unexpected ethical dilemmas. You're stealing from the poor because wealthy families can afford elaborate security measures like iron coffins, locked vaults, and paid guards. The bodies you're taking belong to people who couldn't protect themselves in death, making your profession a form of class warfare played out in cemeteries. The irony is that you're helping to advance medical knowledge that will primarily benefit the wealthy. Your work schedule is dictated by the burial patterns of the local community and the demand from medical schools. Fresh graves are the most valuable, but they're also the most dangerous to rob because families are still actively mourning and may visit the cemetery frequently. You learn to balance the value of fresh corpses against the risk of detection, developing strategies for identifying the safest targets. The legal consequences of being caught are severe but inconsistently enforced. Grave robbing was technically a misdemeanor rather than a felony because stealing a dead body wasn't considered theft of property. Corpses had no legal owner. However, the social outrage surrounding body snatching often led to mob violence against captured resurrection men. Some were beaten, tarred and feathered, or even killed by angry crowds before they could be brought to trial. The seasonal nature of your work means that winter months are often the most productive because cold weather slows decomposition and provides longer hours of darkness for digging. However, frozen ground makes excavation more difficult, and the physical demands of digging in harsh weather conditions take a severe toll on your health. Many resurrection men develop chronic back problems, arthritis, and respiratory issues from working in cold, damp conditions. Some resurrection men specialized in particular types of bodies based on the needs of their medical school customers. Anatomy professors might request bodies with specific diseases or injuries for teaching purposes, while surgical instructors needed fresh corpses for practice operations. The most successful body snatchers developed expertise in identifying and procuring bodies that met specific medical requirements. Historians still argue whether resurrection men were criminals who exploited the dead for profit or essential contributors to medical advancement who risked their freedom to serve the greater good. Some records suggest they were viewed as necessary evils who performed a valuable service, while others indicate they were considered grave criminals who violated the most sacred social taboos. The economic impact of body snatching extended beyond just the medical schools that purchased corpses. Cemetery security became a growing industry, with families hiring guards and investing in protective devices to prevent grave robbing. Iron coffins, mort safes, and watch houses became common features of graveyards in areas with active resurrection men. Remember those plague collectors who handled mass death during epidemics? Well, resurrection men often targeted plague cemeteries because the large number of recent burials provided abundant opportunities for body snatching. Though the risk of disease transmission made these locations particularly dangerous, you've left the world of grave robbing behind. But your next career takes you into spaces so confined and toxic that grown men regularly suffocate while trying to do the job. Welcome to the world of chimney sweeping, where you'll spend your childhood years crawling through narrow flues caked with soot, bird droppings, and the accumulated filth of years of coal burning that can kill you in dozens of different ways. Your career begins around age 6 or 7, when you're small enough to fit through chimney openings that are often less than 14 inches square. You're not choosing this profession. You're either sold by desperate parents or recruited by master sweeps who need children small enough to navigate the increasingly narrow chimney systems of Georgian and Victorian buildings. Your size is your primary qualification, and you'll literally outgrow your usefulness by the time you reach adolescence. The first time you enter a chimney, the experience is terrifying beyond description. You're pushed up into a vertical shaft that's barely wider than your body, surrounded by complete darkness and breathing air that's thick with soot particles that make your lungs burn. The walls are covered with a mixture of coal residue, creosote, bird droppings, and sometimes the decomposed remains of birds or small animals that became trapped and died in the flue. Your climbing technique involves bracing your back against one wall and your knees against the opposite wall, then inching your way upward using friction and muscle strength. The soot is so thick that it gets into your eyes, nose, mouth, and every pore of your skin. You're essentially swimming through decades of accumulated coal residue while trying to scrape the walls clean with primitive brushes and scrapers that you carry in your teeth or tied to your wrists. The physical demands of chimney sweeping are enormous for a child. You're climbing vertical shafts that can be 30 to 40 feet tall, carrying cleaning equipment, and working in spaces where you can't fully extend your arms or legs. The constant friction against rough brick walls scrapes your skin raw, and the soot gets into every cut and abrasion, causing infections that never fully heal. Many chimney sweeps develop permanent scars and deformities from years of crawling through narrow spaces. Your biggest fear isn't just getting stuck, though that happens regularly and can be fatal. You're also terrified of encountering fires that are still burning, hot flues that can cause severe burns, and structural collapses that can crush you inside the chimney. Some chimneys contain sharp metal fixtures, broken bricks, or other hazards that can cause serious injuries. The darkness makes it impossible to see dangers until you're already in contact with them. The soot you're breathing and absorbing through your skin contains numerous toxic substances that cause serious health problems. Coal soot contains carcinogens, heavy metals, and other chemicals that accumulate in your body over time. Most chimney sweeps develop chronic respiratory problems, skin conditions, and what was known as chimney sweeps cancer, a form of scrotal cancer caused by constant exposure to coal tar and other carcinogenic substances in soot. Your work schedule is dictated by the needs of households and businesses that depend on their chimneys for heating and cooking. You start work before dawn and continue until late evening, moving from house to house with your master sweep. The pace is relentless because each chimney takes hours to clean properly, and you're expected to complete multiple jobs per day. The physical exhaustion is overwhelming for a child's body. The social treatment of chimney sweeps was complicated by the essential nature of the work and the obvious exploitation of children. People needed their chimneys cleaned, but were uncomfortable with the conditions that child sweeps endured. Many households tried to avoid thinking about the human cost of their clean chimneys, while others actively campaigned for reforms to protect child workers. Your relationship with your master sweep determines whether you survive the profession or become another casualty of industrial exploitation. Some masters provided adequate food, shelter, and medical care for their apprentices, while others treated children as disposable tools that could be replaced when they became injured or outgrew their usefulness. The mortality rate among child chimney sweeps was horrifically high. The technical aspects of chimney cleaning require genuine skill and knowledge that you develop through painful experience. You learn to identify different types of soot buildup, recognize structural problems that could cause collapses, and navigate complex flue systems that branch in multiple directions. The most experienced sweeps could clean chimneys more efficiently and safely than their inexperienced counterparts. Your tools are simple but essential: brushes of various sizes, scrapers for removing stubborn deposits, and bags for collecting the soot you remove. Everything has to be small enough to fit through narrow openings and light enough for a child to carry while climbing. The brushes are made from stiff bristles that are effective at removing soot, but also scrape your skin raw when you're forced to crawl over them in confined spaces. The economic structure of chimney sweeping created a system where master sweeps profited from child labor, while the children themselves received minimal compensation. You're essentially an indentured servant whose small size makes you valuable until you grow too large to fit through chimney openings. The business model depended on a constant supply of small children who could be trained quickly and replaced when they became unusable. The seasonal nature of chimney sweeping meant that your workload varied dramatically based on weather and heating needs. Winter months were the busiest because households used their fireplaces constantly, creating heavy soot buildup that required frequent cleaning. Summer months were slower but still involved maintenance work and cleaning chimneys that hadn't been used during warm weather. Some chimney sweeps specialized in particular types of buildings or chimney systems. Industrial chimneys required different techniques than residential flues, and some sweeps developed expertise in cleaning the complex chimney systems of large buildings like hospitals, schools, and factories. The most skilled sweeps could command higher wages and better working conditions. Historians still argue whether chimney sweeping represented necessary child labor or systematic exploitation of vulnerable children. Some records suggest that the profession provided opportunities for poor children who had few other options, while others indicate that it was a form of legalized child abuse that caused unnecessary suffering and death. The health consequences of chimney sweeping extended far beyond the immediate dangers of the work. Many former chimney sweeps suffered from chronic respiratory problems, joint deformities, and various cancers throughout their adult lives. The profession literally shortened life expectancy and reduced quality of life for everyone who worked in it. Remember those rat catchers who worked in dangerous, confined spaces? Well, chimney sweeps often encountered rats. You've escaped the suffocating darkness of chimney flues. But your next career takes you to the blood-soaked scaffolds, where public executions provide entertainment for thousands of spectators. As an executioner's assistant, you'll spend your days cleaning up after beheadings, hangings, and other forms of state-sanctioned killing that leave you covered in blood and surrounded by the severed body parts of criminals and political prisoners. Your workday begins before dawn as you prepare the execution site for the day's proceedings. You're responsible for setting up the scaffold, sharpening the axes and swords, testing the gallows mechanisms, and ensuring that everything is ready for the public spectacle that will draw crowds of excited spectators. The executioner gets the glory and the official recognition, but you're the one who handles all the disgusting preparatory work that makes the executions possible. The first execution of the day involves a convicted murderer who's been sentenced to beheading. You position the chopping block, spread straw around the scaffold to absorb the blood, and help restrain the prisoner while the executioner prepares to swing his axe. The moment of execution is surprisingly quick, a single blow that separates the head from the body, but the aftermath is your responsibility. Blood spurts everywhere, the body convulses for several minutes, and you're the one who has to clean up the mess. Your most gruesome task is collecting the severed heads and body parts after each execution. Beheadings don't always go smoothly. Sometimes it takes multiple blows to completely sever a head, leaving you to deal with partially attached heads and massive amounts of blood. You grab the head by the hair, hold it up for the crowd to see as required by law, then place it in a basket with the other heads from the day's executions. The disposal of executed bodies creates its own set of challenges. Some bodies are claimed by families for burial, but many are left for you to handle. You load the corpses onto carts and transport them to designated burial sites, often mass graves outside the city walls. The bodies are heavy, awkward to move, and frequently leak blood and other fluids during transport. Your clothes are permanently stained with blood, and the smell of death follows you everywhere. But here's what makes the job even more disturbing. You're not just cleaning up after executions. You're also responsible for displaying the results as a warning to potential criminals. Severed heads are mounted on spikes and displayed at city gates, while quartered bodies are hung in public places, where they slowly decompose as a deterrent to crime. You maintain these gruesome displays, replacing heads when they fall off their spikes, and cleaning up the rotting flesh that drops to the ground. The public nature of executions means that you're performing your disgusting work in front of large crowds who treat the proceedings as entertainment. Thousands of people gather to watch executions, and they're not just observing the killing, they're also watching you handle the bloody aftermath. Some spectators cheer when you hold up severed heads, while others throw objects at you if they think you're not performing your duties properly. Your relationship with the executioner determines your working conditions and job security. Some executioners treat their assistants as valued partners who share in the responsibilities of their profession, while others view assistants as expendable laborers who can be easily replaced. The best executioners teach their assistants the technical skills needed for efficient killing, while the worst simply use them as cleanup crews. The tools of your trade include mops, buckets, shovels, and various cleaning supplies that help you manage the enormous amounts of blood and bodily fluids generated by public executions. You also maintain the execution equipment, sharpening blades, oiling hinges, and repairing mechanisms that are essential for efficient killing. The technical aspects of execution require genuine skill and knowledge that you develop through experience. The psychological toll of constantly handling severed heads and dismembered bodies is enormous. You're exposed to death and violence on a daily basis, often dealing with the remains of people who were alive and healthy just hours earlier. Many executioners' assistants develop mental health problems, including nightmares, anxiety, and what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Your work schedule is dictated by the court system and the frequency of death sentences in your jurisdiction. Some days involve multiple executions, while others are spent maintaining equipment and displays. The unpredictable nature of the work makes it difficult to plan your personal life, and the social stigma associated with your profession limits your interactions with other people. The social treatment of executioners' assistants was complicated by the necessary nature of their work and the public's fascination with death and violence. People needed executions to be carried out efficiently, but they didn't want to associate with the people who made them possible. You're simultaneously essential to the justice system and excluded from polite society because of your association with death and violence. The economic aspects of execution work provided steady income, but limited opportunities for advancement. Executioners' assistants were usually paid by the execution, with additional fees for special services like displaying heads or maintaining giblets. The most experienced assistants could eventually become executioners themselves, though this required years of training and the approval of local authorities. Some assistants specialized in particular types of executions based on the methods preferred in their regions. Hanging required different skills than beheading, while drawing and quartering involved complex procedures that demanded technical expertise. The most versatile assistants could handle any type of execution, making them valuable to executioners who dealt with various forms of capital punishment. Historians still argue whether executioners' assistants were skilled professionals who contributed to the justice system, or simply people willing to work with death and violence for money. Some records suggest they were respected members of the legal community, while others indicate they were viewed as necessary evils who performed essential but distasteful work. The health risks of execution work included exposure to diseases carried by executed criminals, injuries from handling sharp tools and heavy bodies, and psychological trauma from constant exposure to death and violence. Many assistants developed chronic health problems that were directly related to their work environment and job responsibilities. Remember those plague collectors who handled mass death during epidemics? Well, executioners' assistants often worked during the same period. You've washed the blood from your hands after another day of executions, but your next career takes you below deck on sailing ships where you'll spend months wading through a toxic soup of vomit, rotting food, dead rats, and human waste that accumulates in the lowest parts of vessels during long ocean voyages. Welcome to the world of ship bilge cleaning, where you're literally swimming in the concentrated filth of hundreds of sailors, while the ship rocks violently in ocean storms. Your workday begins when you descend into the ship's hold, the lowest accessible part of the vessel where all the liquid waste naturally collects. The bilge is a dark, cramped space filled with several feet of stagnant water mixed with everything disgusting that has leaked, spilled, or been dumped during the voyage. The smell hits you like a physical wall. Imagine the worst combination of sewage, rotting food, vomit, and decomposing organic matter, all concentrated in an enclosed space with no ventilation. The bilge water itself is a toxic cocktail that defies description. It contains seawater that has leaked through the ship's hull, mixed with urine from sailors who couldn't make it to the ship's head during storms, vomit from seasick passengers and crew members, food scraps that have fallen through deck planks, and the decomposed remains of rats and other vermin that have died in the ship's hold. The consistency ranges from liquid sewage to chunky soup, depending on how long the ship has been at sea. Your primary tool is a bilge pump, a manual device that requires enormous physical effort to operate. You're essentially doing the work of a human-powered sewage treatment plant, pumping hundreds of gallons of toxic waste water out of the ship's hold and overboard into the ocean. The pumping action is exhausting, requiring you to work the handle for hours at a time while standing knee-deep in the very waste you're trying to remove. But pumping isn't your only responsibility. You also have to physically remove solid waste that's too large to go through the pump system. This means reaching into the bilge water with your bare hands to pull out chunks of rotting food, dead rats, pieces of clothing, and other debris that has accumulated during the voyage. The water is so murky that you can't see what you're grabbing until it's already in your hands. The health risks of bilge cleaning are enormous and immediate. The stagnant water is a breeding ground for bacteria, parasites, and other pathogens that can cause serious infections through any cut or abrasion on your skin. Many bilge cleaners develop chronic skin conditions, respiratory problems from inhaling toxic fumes, and gastrointestinal issues from accidental ingestion of contaminated water. The mortality rate among bilge workers was significantly higher than other shipboard occupations. Your work environment is made even more dangerous by the ship's constant motion. You're trying to operate heavy pumping equipment while standing on wet, slippery surfaces in a space that's pitching and rolling with the ocean swells. Falls are common and can be fatal if you're knocked unconscious and fall face first into the bilge water. The confined space makes it difficult for other crew members to rescue you if something goes wrong. The social dynamics of bilge cleaning create a hierarchy of disgust, even among sailors who are accustomed to harsh conditions. You're performing work that even hardened seamen consider too revolting to attempt. Other crew members avoid you because of the smell that permanently clings to your clothes and skin, and you're often excluded from social activities and meal times because your presence makes other people nauseous. The frequency of bilge cleaning depends on the ship's condition, the length of the voyage, and the weather conditions encountered during the trip. Older ships with more leaks require daily bilge pumping, while newer vessels might only need attention every few days. Storm conditions dramatically increase the amount of waste that accumulates in the bilge, as seasick sailors and passengers contribute enormous quantities of vomit to the mixture. Your equipment maintenance is critical because bilge pump failure can literally sink the ship. You're responsible for keeping the pumping mechanisms in working order, clearing blockages, and repairing damage caused by the corrosive effects of the bilge water. The pumps themselves are constantly exposed to acidic waste that corrodes metal parts and clogs moving mechanisms with organic debris. The economic importance of bilge cleaning made it essential despite the disgusting nature of the work. Ships that didn't maintain their bilge systems properly could become waterlogged and sink, taking valuable cargo and human lives with them. Your revolting job was directly connected to the success of maritime commerce and the safety of everyone aboard the vessel. Some bilge cleaners developed specialized techniques for managing different types of waste accumulation. Passenger ships generated different bilge compositions than cargo vessels, and military ships had their own unique waste management challenges. The most experienced bilge workers could predict pump maintenance needs and identify potential problems before they became critical. The seasonal nature of maritime trade meant that your employment was often irregular, with busy periods during favorable sailing seasons and unemployment during winter months when fewer ships were operating. Many bilge cleaners worked multiple jobs during port stays, often choosing occupations that complemented their tolerance for disgusting working conditions. The confined space of ship bilges created unique psychological challenges that were different from land-based disgusting jobs. You're working in a dark, cramped environment that's constantly moving, surrounded by toxic waste, with no possibility of escape until the ship reaches port. The claustrophobic conditions combined with the revolting work environment caused many bilge cleaners to develop anxiety disorders and other mental health problems. Your relationship with the ship's officers and crew was complicated by the essential nature of your work and the obvious health risks you were accepting. Some captains treated bilge cleaners as valuable crew members whose work was essential for ship safety, while others viewed them as expendable laborers who could be easily replaced at the next port. Historians still argue whether bilge cleaning was considered skilled maritime work, or simply a job for people desperate enough to accept any employment. Some records suggest that experienced bilge cleaners were respected for their technical knowledge and willingness to perform dangerous work, while others indicate they were viewed as the lowest members of the ship's social hierarchy. The international nature of maritime trade meant that bilge cleaners often worked on ships with diverse crews and passenger lists, exposing them to diseases and parasites from around the world. The bilge water became a mixing bowl for pathogens from different continents, creating unique health risks that were specific to maritime occupations. Remember those toshers who worked in London sewers? Well, bilge cleaners often came from similar backgrounds, as both jobs required tolerance for working in toxic waste environments and willingness to accept significant health risks for steady employment. The skills were surprisingly transferable between the two professions. You've pumped your last gallon of ship bilge, but your next career takes you to the garbage heaps and refuse piles of industrial cities, where you'll spend your days sorting through rotting organic waste to collect bones that will be processed into soap, glue, and other products that polite society uses without thinking about their disgusting origins. Welcome to the world of bone grubbing, where you're literally digging through mountains of decomposing garbage with your bare hands to find the skeletal remains of dead animals. Your workday begins at the city's refuse dumps, enormous piles of garbage that contain everything discarded by urban populations. Food scraps, dead animals, human waste, industrial byproducts, and the general detritus of civilization. You're equipped with a canvas bag, a pointed stick for probing through debris, and the knowledge that somewhere in these mountains of rotting waste are valuable bones that factories will pay good money to purchase for industrial processing. The bone grubbing process requires you to physically dig through layers of decomposing organic matter, searching for animal bones that have been thrown away by butchers, restaurants, and households. You're looking for leg bones, rib cages, skulls, and other skeletal remains that contain the marrow and calcium compounds needed for soap and glue production. The bones are often mixed with rotting meat, maggots, and other organic matter that makes the collection process particularly revolting. Your working environment is a landscape of decay that changes daily as new garbage is added to the piles. The refuse heaps are home to rats, flies, and other scavengers that compete with you for access to organic waste. The smell is overwhelming, a combination of rotting food, decomposing animals, human waste, and industrial chemicals that creates a toxic atmosphere that makes your eyes water and your throat burn. The bones you're collecting aren't just random animal remains. You're looking for specific types of bones that have different industrial values. Large leg bones from cattle and horses are the most valuable because they contain substantial amounts of marrow that can be processed into high-quality glue. Smaller bones from pigs, sheep, and poultry are less valuable but still worth collecting for soap production. You develop an expert eye for identifying valuable bones, even when they're covered with rotting flesh and maggots. Your collection technique involves using your pointed stick to probe through garbage layers, then grabbing bones with your bare hands when you locate them. The bones are often slippery with decomposing organic matter, and you have to scrape away rotting meat and other debris before adding them to your collection bag. The physical contact with decomposing animal remains means your hands are constantly exposed to bacteria and other pathogens that can cause serious infections. The economic structure of bone grubbing created a market where industrial factories paid bone grubbers based on the quantity and quality of bones they could collect. The best bones were those that were relatively fresh and contained substantial amounts of marrow, while older bones that had been picked clean by scavengers were worth less money. You learn to identify the most valuable bones and develop strategies for finding them before other bone grubbers or scavengers get to them. Your competition includes not just other bone grubbers, but also the various animals that live in the garbage dumps. Rats, dogs, and other scavengers are constantly eating the meat and marrow from bones, reducing their industrial value. You're essentially racing against decomposition and animal scavenging to collect bones before they become worthless for industrial processing. The health risks of bone grubbing are severe and immediate. You're constantly exposed to bacteria, parasites, and toxic substances that accumulate in urban garbage dumps. Cuts and abrasions from sharp bones and metal debris provide entry points for infections, while the toxic atmosphere of the dumps causes respiratory problems and other health issues. Many bone grubbers develop chronic illnesses that are directly related to their work environment. The social status of bone grubbers was among the lowest in industrial society. You're literally making a living from garbage, which places you at the bottom of the economic hierarchy, even among people who work in disgusting occupations. Other workers look down on bone grubbers as desperate individuals who are willing to do anything for money, while respectable citizens prefer not to acknowledge that their soap and glue products come from garbage dump scavenging. Your daily routine involves not just collecting bones, but also sorting them by type and quality for sale to different industrial customers. Soap factories want bones with high fat content, while glue manufacturers prefer bones with substantial marrow. You develop expertise in bone grading that allows you to maximize your income by selling different types of bones to the customers who value them most. The seasonal nature of bone grubbing means that your income fluctuates based on weather conditions and the types of garbage being discarded. Winter months often provide better bone collecting opportunities because cold weather slows decomposition and reduces competition from scavenging animals. Summer months are more challenging because the heat accelerates decay and increases the populations of flies and other insects that make working conditions even more unpleasant. Some bone grubbers specialized in particular types of bones or developed relationships with specific industrial customers who provided steady income in exchange for reliable supply. The most successful bone grubbers learn to identify the best garbage dumps, develop efficient collection techniques, and build business relationships that provided economic stability in an otherwise unpredictable profession. The industrial importance of bone grubbing made it an essential part of the manufacturing economy despite its disgusting nature. Soap and glue were important products that required steady supplies of animal bones, and bone grubbers provided the raw materials that made these industries possible. Your revolting work was directly connected to the production of consumer goods that people used daily. Your tools evolved as you gained experience in the profession. Experienced bone grubbers developed specialized equipment for probing through garbage, extracting bones from difficult locations, and transporting their collections efficiently. Some used modified hooks and rakes to avoid direct hand contact with decomposing waste, while others developed techniques for cleaning bones more efficiently before sale. Historians still argue whether bone grubbing represented entrepreneurial recycling or desperate scavenging by people with no other economic options. Some records suggest that successful bone grubbers were small business operators who provided valuable services to industrial customers, while others indicate that bone grubbing was a last resort for people who couldn't find other employment. The urban geography of bone grubbing created informal territories where different grubbers worked specific garbage dumps or neighborhoods. Competition for the best bone collecting locations sometimes led to conflicts between grubbers, while cooperation allowed them to share information about valuable finds and industrial customers who paid premium prices. Remember those rat catchers who worked in disgusting environments filled with vermin? You've sorted your last pile of rotting bones, but your final career takes you into the most intimate and degrading service imaginable: cleaning the private toilets and washing the soiled undergarments of royalty and nobility. As a privy cleaner in medieval and early modern palaces, you'll spend your days handling the bodily waste of the most powerful people in society, while maintaining the fiction that such exalted individuals don't actually produce the same disgusting biological functions as common people. Your workday begins before dawn in the royal apartments, where you must empty and clean the elaborate chamber pots and close stools used by kings, queens, and their courtiers. These aren't simple containers. They're ornate pieces of furniture designed to maintain royal dignity while serving the same basic function as a common toilet. Your job is to remove all evidence of their use while pretending that nothing unpleasant has occurred. The royal privy system is surprisingly complex, involving multiple chamber pots, elaborate cleaning rituals, and strict protocols for handling royal waste. You're not just emptying containers. You're participating in an elaborate charade that maintains the illusion of royal superiority, while dealing with the reality that even kings and queens produce the same bodily waste as peasants. The cognitive dissonance is enormous as you bow respectfully while carrying buckets of royal excrement. Your most challenging task is washing the soiled undergarments of royal family members, a job that requires you to handle intimate clothing items that are stained with urine, feces, menstrual blood, and other bodily fluids. The washing process involves soaking the garments in various solutions, scrubbing them by hand, and ensuring that they're completely clean before returning them to the royal wardrobe. The physical contact with royal bodily waste is unavoidable and constant. The cleaning solutions you use are surprisingly sophisticated, involving combinations of soap, lye, vinegar, and other chemicals that were effective at removing stains and odors from delicate fabrics. However, these same chemicals are harsh on your skin, causing chronic irritation and chemical burns that never fully heal. Your hands are permanently damaged from constant exposure to caustic cleaning agents and royal bodily waste. Your work environment is the most private and intimate space in the palace. The royal bedchambers and private apartments, where the most powerful people in the kingdom perform their most basic biological functions. You're privy to information about royal health, personal habits, and intimate details that could be politically valuable or personally embarrassing. The knowledge you gain makes you both valuable and dangerous to the royal household. The social dynamics of privy cleaning create a bizarre hierarchy where you're simultaneously essential to royal comfort and completely invisible to royal society. You must be present to perform your duties, but invisible enough that royalty can maintain the fiction that their waste is handled by magic rather than human labor. The psychological toll of being treated as both indispensable and non-existent is enormous. Your discretion is absolutely critical because any revelation about royal bodily functions could undermine the divine authority that monarchs claim to possess. You're sworn to secrecy about everything you observe, and violations of this trust could result in imprisonment or death. The burden of keeping royal secrets while performing the most intimate personal services creates constant psychological pressure. The technical aspects of privy cleaning require genuine expertise in stain removal, fabric care, and waste disposal that you develop through years of experience. Different types of stains require different treatment methods, and you learn to identify the most effective cleaning techniques for various fabrics and soil types. Your knowledge of cleaning chemistry rivals that of professional launderers. Your daily routine involves not just cleaning, but also maintaining the elaborate fixtures and furniture associated with royal toilet facilities. Close stools require regular maintenance, chamber pots need polishing, and the various accessories used in royal hygiene must be kept in perfect condition. You're essentially a specialized maintenance worker for the royal bathroom system. The health risks of privy cleaning include constant exposure to human waste, harsh cleaning chemicals, and the various diseases that can be transmitted through contact with bodily fluids. Many privy cleaners develop chronic respiratory problems, skin conditions, and other health issues that are directly related to their work environment. The mortality rate among palace privy cleaners was higher than most other court positions. Your relationship with other palace staff is complicated by the intimate nature of your work and the secrets you're required to keep. Other servants may view you with suspicion because of your access to private royal information, while some may treat you with contempt because of your association with bodily waste. The social isolation is profound even within the servant community. The economic benefits of privy cleaning include steady employment, access to palace food and shelter, and the potential for advancement within the royal household. However, the social costs are enormous, as your association with royal waste makes you unmarriageable and excludes you from most social activities. You're trading economic security for social isolation and personal dignity. Some privy cleaners developed specialized knowledge about royal health based on their observations of waste products, making them informal medical advisors who could identify illness or dietary problems before official physicians. This medical knowledge made them valuable to the royal household, but also increased the burden of secrecy they were required to maintain. The seasonal nature of court life meant that your workload varied based on royal travel schedules and the presence of guests at the palace. Major court events and diplomatic visits dramatically increased the number of chamber pots and soiled garments you had to handle, while periods when the royal family was traveling provided opportunities for deep cleaning and maintenance of royal toilet facilities. Your tools and supplies were often of higher quality than those used by common cleaners, because royal standards demanded perfect results. You had access to expensive soaps, fine brushes, and specialized cleaning agents that were imported from distant locations. The irony is that you're using luxury products to clean up the same basic waste that every human produces. Historians still argue whether privy cleaners were skilled professionals who provided essential services or simply desperate individuals willing to accept the most degrading work available. Some records suggest they were trusted members of the royal household who possessed valuable technical knowledge, while others indicate they were viewed as necessary but contemptible figures who performed work that no respectable person would consider. The international nature of royal courts meant that privy cleaning techniques and protocols varied between different kingdoms and cultures. Some courts had elaborate rituals surrounding waste disposal, while others treated it as a purely practical matter. The most experienced privy cleaners could adapt their techniques to different royal preferences and cultural expectations. Remember those gong farmers who cleaned medieval cesspits? Well, palace privy cleaners often coordinated with gong farmers for the disposal of royal waste, creating a chain of disgusting jobs that connected the most exalted and most humble members of society through their shared involvement in waste management. You've scrubbed your final royal chamber pot, but your last career in this catalog of human misery takes you to the most emotionally devastating job of all: preparing the bodies of plague victims for burial when death has become so common that families can no longer care for their own deceased. As a corpse washer during medieval plague outbreaks, you'll spend your days handling the decomposing remains of people who died in agony while their loved ones watch helplessly, knowing that you might be washing their bodies tomorrow. Your workday begins when families bring you the bodies of their deceased relatives. People who were alive and healthy just days ago before the plague consumed them with fever, swollen lymph nodes, and internal bleeding that turned their skin black with necrosis. You're not just handling anonymous corpses. These are mothers, fathers, children, and grandparents whose families are paying you to perform the final act of care that they're too terrified or too sick to do themselves. The corpse washing process involves stripping the bodies of their clothing, which is often soaked with blood, vomit, and other bodily fluids that leaked from the deceased during their final hours. The plague victims you're handling died in excruciating pain, and their bodies show the evidence of their suffering: swollen buboes that have burst and drained, skin that has turned black from internal bleeding, and facial expressions frozen in agony that haunt your dreams. Your washing technique requires you to clean every part of the body with soap and water, removing the accumulated filth of illness while trying to restore some dignity to people who died in the most undignified circumstances imaginable. The bodies are often stiff with rigor mortis, making them difficult to position and manipulate during the washing process. You're essentially performing a final act of human care for people who can no longer care for themselves. The water you use for washing becomes contaminated with plague bacteria and other pathogens that can infect you through any cut or abrasion on your skin. You're constantly exposed to the very disease that killed the people you're washing, knowing that each body you handle increases your chances of becoming a corpse yourself. The irony is that you're performing acts of compassion that will probably kill you. Your work environment is a constant reminder of mortality and human suffering. You're surrounded by the bodies of people who died horrible deaths, while outside your workspace, more people are dying every day from the same disease. The psychological toll of constantly handling plague victims is enormous, especially when you recognize faces of people you knew from the community. The families who bring you bodies are often in the early stages of plague infection themselves, meaning that you're not just washing the dead, you're also interacting with people who will probably be dead within days. The emotional burden of providing comfort to grieving families, while knowing they're likely doomed, is almost unbearable. You become a witness to the complete breakdown of normal human society. Your preparation of bodies involves not just washing, but also dressing them in burial clothes and arranging them in positions that provide some dignity for the final viewing by family members. This requires you to handle bodies that are actively decomposing, often with limbs that have become discolored or swollen beyond recognition. The physical contact with decomposing plague victims is unavoidable and constant. The sheer volume of bodies during plague outbreaks means that you're working around the clock, washing dozens of corpses daily, while the death toll continues to climb. The pace is relentless because families need bodies prepared quickly before decomposition, makes the process even more difficult. You're essentially running a death factory that processes human remains as efficiently as possible. Your relationship with the families of plague victims is complicated by their grief, terror, and desperation. Some families are grateful for your services and treat you with respect, while others are so traumatized by loss that they can barely function. You become a combination of mortician, counselor, and witness to human suffering on a scale that defies comprehension. The economic aspects of corpse washing during plague outbreaks create a market where desperate families pay premium prices for services that no one else is willing to provide. Your willingness to handle plague victims makes you valuable, but it also makes you a pariah who is avoided by anyone who isn't directly affected by death. The social isolation is complete. You're surrounded by death and excluded from life. Your tools and supplies include soap, water, clean cloths, and burial garments that must be constantly replenished as the death toll mounts. The logistics of maintaining adequate supplies during a plague outbreak are challenging because normal commerce breaks down when large portions of the population are dead or dying. You're often working with inadequate materials while trying to maintain standards of dignity and cleanliness. The health risks of corpse washing during plague outbreaks are obvious and immediate. You're handling bodies that are actively infected with deadly bacteria, often with open wounds and bodily fluids that provide direct transmission routes for disease. Most corpse washers during plague outbreaks eventually contracted the disease themselves, making it essentially a suicide profession. Your knowledge of death and decomposition becomes encyclopedic as you handle hundreds of plague victims. You learn to identify different stages of plague infection based on the appearance of corpses, recognize the various ways the disease kills people, and understand the timeline of decomposition under different conditions. This expertise makes you a valuable source of information about the plague's progression. But it also means you're constantly confronted with evidence of human mortality. The seasonal nature of plague outbreaks means that your workload fluctuates dramatically based on disease patterns and weather conditions. Some outbreaks burn through communities quickly, creating intense periods of activity followed by relative calm. Others persist for months or years, requiring sustained effort that takes an enormous physical and psychological toll. Some corpse washers specialized in particular types of plague victims based on age, social status, or the specific variant of plague that killed them. Children's bodies require different handling techniques than adults, while wealthy families often paid extra for elaborate preparation rituals that maintained social distinctions even in death. Historians still argue whether corpse washers during plague outbreaks were heroes, who provided essential services during humanity's darkest hours, or simply desperate individuals who accepted deadly work because they had no other options. Some records suggest they were viewed as essential workers who deserved respect and gratitude, while others indicate they were feared as potential disease carriers who might spread infection. The religious and cultural significance of corpse washing varies between different communities and time periods, but the basic human need to care for the dead remains constant across cultures. You're performing one of humanity's most fundamental rituals, preparing the deceased for their final journey, while risking your own life to maintain human dignity in the face of mass death. Remember all those disgusting jobs we've explored together. The gong farmers, the fullers, the toshers, the plague collectors, the leech gatherers, the knocker-uppers, the rat catchers, the tanners, the resurrection men. As we reach the end of our journey through history's most revolting occupations, let your mind drift away from these scenes of medieval misery and industrial horror. The gong farmers have finished their midnight rounds, the fullers have hung up their urine-soaked aprons, and the corpse washers have finally laid down their blood-stained claws. These jobs, thankfully, have faded into history, replaced by modern sanitation, mechanization, and labor protections that our ancestors could never have imagined. Tonight, as you settle into your clean sheets in your climate-controlled room, remember that someone, somewhere in history, had to do these jobs so that civilization could function. They crawled through sewers, waded through waste, and handled death itself with nothing but primitive tools and desperate courage. Their sacrifice, their suffering, and their resilience built the foundation for the comfortable world we inhabit today. The next time you flip a light switch, flush a toilet, or simply breathe clean air, spare a thought for those forgotten workers who made our modern conveniences possible through their willingness to do the jobs that no one else would do. They may have lived in filth, but they died with dignity, knowing that their disgusting work served a purpose greater than themselves. Sleep well, knowing that the worst jobs in human history are behind us, and that tomorrow you'll wake up in a world where no one has to choose between starvation